exploring the impact of gang culture on the RSS member states. The discussion explores factors associated with the phenomenon, appropriate policies, operational and other programmatic responses in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the wider Caribbean. Conclude putting questions to the regional and international leaders. March 20th at 5 p.m. at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts. The regional security system, with support from the European Union, will be conducting a panel discussion at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts, under the theme Exploring the Impact of Gang Culture on the RSS member states. The discussion explores factors associated with the gang phenomenon, appropriate policies, operational and other programmatic responses in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the wider Caribbean. Putting questions to the regional and international powers. March 20th at 5 p.m. at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts. The regional security system, with support from the European Union, will be conducting a panel discussion at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts, under the theme Exploring the Impact of Gang Culture on the RSS member states. The discussion explores factors associated with the gang phenomenon, appropriate policies, operational and other and the wider Caribbean. Putting questions to the regional and international powers. March 20th at 5 p.m. at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts. The regional security system, with support from the European Union, will be conducting a panel discussion at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts, under the theme Exploring the Impact of Gang Culture on the RSS member states. The discussion explores factors associated with the gang phenomenon, appropriate policies, operational and other programmatic responses in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the wider Caribbean. Putting questions to international powers. March 20th at 5 p.m. at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts. The regional security system, with support from the European Union, will be conducting a panel discussion at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts, under the theme Exploring the Impact of Gang Culture on the RSS member states. The discussion explores factors associated with the gang phenomenon, appropriate policies, operational and other programmatic responses in St. Kitts and Nevis, and the wider Caribbean. Putting questions to the regional and international powers. March 20th at 5 p.m. at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts. The regional security system, with support from the European Union, will be conducting a panel discussion at the Wesley. The regional security system, with support from the European Union will be conducting a panel discussion at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basseterre, St. Kitts, under the theme Exploring the Impact of Gang Culture on the RSS member states. questions to the regional and international bodies, March 20th at 5 p.m. at the Wesley Methodist Church, Seaton Street, Basse Office.
Much for making it. I apologize for the late start. We might want to hit that, turning off the volume to the TV, or we're going to have a redundant sound. Okay, thank you very much. So, I would like to thank all of you for making it to the session here tonight. I think that, or my hope is that you're going to get out of it as much as I do. I think that we have a lot to learn about gangs in the Caribbean and gangs in St. Kitts as well. Charles Katz. I'll be moderating tonight. I'm a professor at Arizona State University in the Criminology Department and director of the Center for Violence Prevention and Community Safety. I've been doing a little bit of work on gangs and crime and violence here in the Caribbean over the past 10 to 15 years, and it's a pleasure that I was invited, and thank you, Rhea, for inviting me to this event. I would also like to thank the European Union, RSS, as well as the Ministry of National Security here in St. Kitts for hosting this event tonight. I know that it's a lot of work to put on. Tonight, we're going to have a plenary session on gang culture. I think gangs resonate with folks regardless of what nation you're in. Gangs have been found to be present in almost all nations around the world. You aren't going to find many nations that do not have gangs. We know that roughly 6% of kids at one time in their life will join a gang and be in the gang for a year to two. But yet we oftentimes don't have near enough conversation about gangs and what they mean to society. The question is not oftentimes are gangs present in your community, but oftentimes the impact that they're going to have and how big of an impact that they're going to have. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to go ahead and start off with the invocation. Next we'll have an anthem, and we'll have some welcoming remarks by Permanent Secretary Petty. And then we'll have a series of panel discussions, and we'll get into that in just a second. But right now I would like to go ahead and invite up Pastor Penny for the invocation. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor. Good afternoon. Would you please stand for the invocation? Our Father and our God, we come this afternoon to thank you for your goodness and for your blessings upon all of us. We thank you for bringing us here this afternoon. And as we gather in this session, in this panel discussion, in this series of a forum, question and answer, deliberations, or ideas, as we seek to learn more and to tackle the issues of gang and to explore the gang subculture, we pray you'll be with us. We ask you to grant us wisdom and understanding, and you'll open up our eyes, open up our minds, that we will think outside the box. We recognize that we have problems, and we have problems with young folks. We have problems with the issues of gangs. We recognize that we do not have all the answers, but we recognize that you are the source, and we can call upon you. So we pray for all the panelists, and we pray for all in the audience. We pray that you'll grant us wisdom and understanding. We thank you for our advisors, our psychologists, our police officers, our defense force, the Ministry of Education, those in the social services, those in the social sciences, the behavioralists, and all those who will seek, oh God, even us in the ministry, to make St. Kitts and Nevis a better place. We ask you to grant us wisdom and understanding. For political leaders, that you grant them wisdom and understanding. May all of us have the fortitude to stand up and to stand up for that which is right. Pray for a permanent secretary and the secretariat and all those who work for the good of St. Kitts and Nevis, that we may all learn to work together so that we may make St. Kitts and Nevis a better place and ultimately the world. So be with us. We thank you for the RSS and for all those who have the charge of this and those who funded this endeavor. We ask you to bless them. Be with us now, we pray, in Jesus' name and for his sake. Amen.
Could you please continue to stand for the national anthem? Thank you. Please feel free to be seated. We'll go ahead and start off with opening remarks by Permanent Secretary Petty.
Thank you, Dr. Katz, our moderator, Dr. the Honorable Timothy Harris, our Prime Minister and Minister of National Security, the Honorable Vance Emery, Senior Minister in the Federal Cabinet. I would want to jointly recognize our head table, who I think would be introduced as we go along, and the members from the RSS team, our police commissioner and ranks of the Royal St. Christopher Navy's Police Force, our National Security Advisor, other members of the law enforcement fraternity, to use that term here in St. Kitts, the prisons. I want to recognize our people from the court, social welfare, the army, our psychologists, and I want to especially welcome our community policing national intervention team who work with me. I welcome you all to this, what I expect to be a very important and challenging discussion to tease our minds as we address a major concern here in the Federation. About 2 years ago, I was at RSS meeting, and we were introduced to a study which was spearheaded by the RSS involving based on troubled youth, troubled gangs, troubled youth groups. And there we learned that per capita, St. Kitts and Nevis had the highest percentage of children in troubled youth groups from the age of 9. We know that this is a phenomenon in all of the countries, but it was not very pleasant to hear that per capita St. Kitts had a high rate. We know, the police and others who are associated with youth here in St. Kitts know that some of our young people have moved up from the age of 9, and some of them are now in gangs. And so it's a concern to us. What are gangs? We've heard discussions over the years about whether what we have in St. Kitts are gangs compared to what we have in Jamaica and other places. But I don't know if that is so important, because homicides are homicides, whether they are in Jamaica, Trinidad, or St. Kitts or Antigua. We have too many, which seem to be gang-related, and we need to do something about it. We have begun in the Ministry of National Security to roll out, as part of a broader community policing initiative, community youth groups, which we call explorers. At the moment, we have formed 6, and we have over 400 members, young people. This combined with the traditional, or the more traditional engagements of the youth department, the Ministry of Social Development, the church and so on, who also have youth programs, as we try our best to steer the young people into more productive ways. Additionally, we have social intervention type interactions with gang members in the communities. And of course, we have the traditional police, stop and search, hard policing, as they say, where we try to put a lid on gang members. I want to say that all of these things are being done. What else can be done? We would hope that during this discussion here in St. Kitts, we can get other ideas. Across the RSS member states, we can get other ideas, as together we come to grips with the gang culture. We come up with solutions to try and engage our youth, to focus them in new directions, and hopefully in due course rid ourselves of gangs, if not totally, almost to have them disappearing. And so once again, I want to welcome the panelists. I want to welcome all of the persons here. I want to thank the RSS for organizing this timely discussion here in St. Kitts, and we look forward to a very productive evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're going to go ahead and start off with our panelists. I would ask you to keep your, or to hold off on any questions that you might have. The program that we have tonight has been well thought out by the RSS, and we're going to be starting off with a local overview of gangs or troublesome youth groups here in St. Kitts. And then we're going to go through a series of the other panelists focusing on organizational responses, characteristics of intervention programs, as well as policy responses. Each of the presentations will be roughly 15 minutes long. I'll do my best to keep our panelists within the 15-minute guidelines. And then following the four panelists, we're going to go ahead and open it up to you for your questions, comments, and suggestions, criticisms, and whatnot that you may have and may wish to express. And so we are going to go ahead and start off with Acting Commissioner Brown. Acting Commissioner Brown has been for a long time been focused on issues related to gangs. Over the past 12 years, he spent quite a bit of time focusing on issues related to intelligence, as well as issues surrounding gangs and troublesome youth groups. Acting Commissioner?
Good afternoon, everyone. Mr. Moderator, I beg to adopt the protocol. And just to add one little bit of correction, it's not acting commissioner, it's assistant commissioner of police. For the record. Sorry. Yes. This afternoon, I'm tasked with giving the local perspective on the gang situation in our federation. And so this 15 minutes presentation would be localized to Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis. Some of the data may skew a little bit to some of our neighboring countries, but not very far off. Okay. Scope of this presentation is basically to list the risk factors that leads to gang formation and some associated trends, identifying the impact of gang violence on the nation, highlighting previous challenges, and mitigating efforts employed by law enforcement agencies. Finally, I'll suggest recommendations to effectively assist our SS member states. Let me start with a brief introduction. Over the last 2 decades, the Federation of St. Christopher and Nevis has recorded over 360 homicides. Of those homicides, at least 355 was a result of gang activity. More than 270 were firearm related. Of that, males between the age 16 to 35 account for 90% of the victims. With a combined population of just 50,000, these figures put our federation front and center of the debate on criminal gang formation. These figures alone tells us of the impact it's been having on our small federation. In 2011, we witnessed our worst year of violence, when the Federation recorded 34 homicides. Of those homicides, 98% were gang-related. Over the last 10 years, law enforcement agencies combined, the police, the customs, the military, took over 290 firearms off the streets. Some of these firearms are military-grade firearms, ranging from AK-47s, M16, and AR-15s. St. Kitts, like any other Caribbean countries, are the other gangs, such as the Ghost Gang that operates in the Shadwell community, the Black Bloody Murderers, the BBM, and the Bloods gang that operates in a section of Bastille. In Nevis, our gangs also have infested the country of Nevis. But Nevis have a unique problem in that the gangs that are localized to St. Kitts have association, direct association to troubled youths in Nevis. The risk factors. What is driving the formation of criminal gangs in the Federation? Why are young men and some women so angry, cold, callous? Why is there thirst for blood and revenge? During the research, we came across 6 main factors, individual characteristics. And you'll see here, we have pre-existing delinquency, illegal drugs, guns ownership, desirous for status, companionship and protection, and violent victimization. I want to spend 1 minute thereabout to talk about desirous for status and companionship and protection, because it is very important. We have seen the glorification of gangsterism, and when we listen to what is being played on the radio and television, a recent song by a Jamaican artist said, and I quote, "It only takes one phone call to make some boy wipe off the earth and drop down flat." Another one said, "Do not waste the bullets." And in February 2019, we witnessed 7 homicides. Most of those homicides resulted in gunshot wounds to the head. If we want to make some correlation to what is being played on the airways in these songs, some of the artists that we entertain, the 7 homicides in February alone is enough to say that these songs are having some form of impact. We turn to the family. Family disorganization, including broken homes, the neglect and parental drugs and alcohol abuse, and family violence. Family play a very important role in the build-up of our youths, and the shift away from the fundamental principles that is Sunday school, sports, youth groups, have significantly contributed to the tearing down of our social fabric. It simply tells us we need to return to the basics, the principles of the whole. The peer groups, the frequent interaction with delinquent peers, gang members, the experience of kindness to success in gangs. Whereas we chastise our youth when they fail, are perceived to be failures in school. The gang leaders glorify them when they are successful in their illegal activities. And in a conversation today, the Minister of National Security asks the question, what happens when the concentration of illegality is in the homes? How do we treat with that? How do we reach the adults when we speak to peer pressure alone? We turn to the schools. The demoralization of students in the school because of poor performance, learning difficulties, low educational aspirations, and the negative labeling by teachers. These continue to make these institutions the premier breeding ground or recruitment site for gang leaders. The community. Long time ago, most of us here in this room learned of the motto, it takes a community to raise a child. No longer it seems that we are living by that motto in 2019. Children seems to be being raised by the guns, and they are dying by the guns. And I say this because 2 weeks ago, I had a conversation with a gang leader, and he said to me, "MacArthur, when you are asking me to ask the youths to stop fighting, what alternative will I give them? What can I offer them when gang war is all they know? This is what they were born into." He further went on and said, "They understand that they will die before they reach the age of 30. And I said to him, the alternative to that is that they could live past 100. The proliferation of guns in our communities is another cause for concern. 290 guns in 10 years is an alarming figure for a small country like St. Kitts and Nevis. Families are now cultured to protect their own, protect the gangsters. Sections of communities are rising up against law enforcement operations while supporting the gangsters. These actions create confusions in the mind of our children as to who are the bad people and who are the good people, whether they choose the police or the gangsters. And I want to highlight particular incidents where in Nevis you had angry mobs destroying hospitals because the police, in an unfortunate situation, took a life of a young man. And you had over 30-something witnesses coming forward when the incident happened in the dead of the night. A similar incident took place at a sporting event, High Day, on Sunday. Many people were around. It was not the police this time, but a localized gangster. And the police had difficulty in finding one witness to this tragic crime. We look at the regional and international influence. How developed countries, through their media, and we're not talking about the news media this time around, influence our youths on the street. It's easy to spread violent pictures of murder scenes across WhatsApp, Facebook, instead of spreading a positive message of love and peace. We move to the impact on our nation. Society. Gangsterism creates an atmosphere of fear and intimidation. Communities are now developing a culture of silence, and the greatest impact of all is the significant loss of life. The healthcare system, strain on the health sector, the burden to our resources. Our research points to the cost of a single gunshot wound range from 6,800 EC to 10,200 EC per individual. Our education system, destruction of our schools, Local gangs influence our students to form their own little gangs within the schools. We see broadcasting on social media, male turning on females, students fighting with teachers, and they're leaving the school and coming back and say, I'm going home, and come back. And you better don't be there when I reach back. The tourism sector. Tourism accounts for 25% of our gross domestic products. Crime and violence, murders, and mayhem have a direct impact on tourist arrival, foreign direct investment, What happens if the cruise ships stop coming? What happens if the investors turn away and go to neighboring countries? Challenges. The research looked at some of our challenges, and the map that you saw before depicts the widespread gang activities. We look at the insufficient information sharing mechanisms within the inter-island law enforcement agencies, the shortage of manpower within the law enforcement communities. And I just want to pause for 2 seconds and say, while we scream for shortage of manpower in law enforcement agencies, we have over 400 police officers. But while we throw police and law enforcement agencies, the Custom and Defense Force, at the problems, we have less than 20 psychologists. No one is stopping to think of the post-traumatic stress disorder that confront the children, the youths who are engaged in the gang violence. So the cycle continues. We look at the limited resources within the law enforcement communities who understand the impact of gangs, who understand the gang culture. It simply means that we do not have enough or sufficient skill set within our security forces to confront this new phenomenon. The lack of cooperation between citizens and law enforcers can underscore the point, the culture of silence that is developing. Police cannot get witnesses to come forward to crime. The see and don't see, the hear and deaf attitude is creeping up and is growing. The mitigation efforts by law enforcement. So far, we have introduced the anti-gang unit tasked with confronting the gang phenomenon, patrolling the hotspots, targeted searches, the introduction of CCTV in strategic areas, the implementation of community policing initiative. The Permanent Secretary spoke to the Youth Explore groups. And when one gangster could boast that he commands over 200 persons, it may not be 200 members, but he have influence over 200 persons. Mr. Petty was proud enough to say his Youth Explore groups have over 400 members. This is a positive sign that we are reaching the most vulnerable. The inter-island security meetings to address common challenges. Recently, our federation hosted Anguilla and St. Martin in an inter-island conference, which resulted in success. The development of regional security systems and our training to bring better officers to our streets. The drafting of Gang Prevention and Prohibition Act and the launching of island constables. Finally, our research team looked at recommendations, introducing strategic mentorship programs, develop a thorough gang map. That is a better understanding of how the gangs work, how the gangs are formed, the mode of operation. Reviving effective federal funding for youth programs. Providing job training and education opportunities as incentive. So now I can go back and tell that gang leader I spoke to that he have hope, because there will be a private-public partnership to support his initiative, his law-abiding initiative. Implementing policies that mandate counseling service for students and families associated with gangs. No longer should we target just the students alone. As the Minister of National Security pointed out, we need to reach the homes with parents, the aunties, the uncles. Continue school security, complemented by frequent police visits. And I want to add not just police visits, but visits by psychologists. Implementing systems that would mandate continuous review of existing policing policies to support law enforcement efforts. And public education, such as forums as these, so that the public can understand what the police, what the military, what the customs, what the government is doing, what the business entities are doing to help alleviate this gang problem. Our references, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Assistant Commissioner. Next is former Commissioner of Police from Jamaica, Owen Ellington, who's going to be speaking to us a little bit about operational responses to gangs. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moderator. Distinguished ladies and gentlemen, ministers of government, my former security sector colleague from Jamaica, Major General Stuart Saunders, colleagues in law enforcement, members of the audience, and fellow panelists. I thank you for the opportunity to be here to take part in this public forum on discussing gangs, gang culture, etc. Special thanks to the officers of the RSS who made this possible for me to be here today. I've been asked to speak on the subject of the Jamaican gang culture, and then add a little bit on operational response, drawing on our experiences in Jamaica. And upon arriving here today, I actually saw where the program narrows the focus to operational response. I'm not going to spend much time on the culture, but it is important that I take a few minutes just to put the presentation in context. I'll begin by speaking a little bit about what Jamaica was like at independence in 1962, the year I was born. We were a very peaceful country. We had a murder rate of less than 4 per 100,000 of the population, which was at the time below the global average. But by 1972, just 10 years later, we saw a marginal increase in the number of murders. I think we had about 170 in that year, and most of them were due to domestic conflicts. But by 1980, less than 10 years later, we had a situation where the country recorded 900 murders, just thereabout. Over 800 of those murders were attributed to criminal gangs who were involved in enforcing tribal politics. Young men were engaged by corrupt politicians, armed and paid to enforce a kind of politics which actually denies people their constitutional right to vote as they wished to. Very soon, those youngsters who formed the gangs discovered that the violence-producing capacity that they were allowed to build up over the decade of the 1970s could be converted to violence for profit. So they started to engage 1,800 murders in 1 year. We were 63 murders per 100,000 of the population, in the top 3 of the most murderous countries in the world. And we were second only to El Salvador, with a number of persons being killed by guns. That was the state of Jamaica, averaging over 500 gun attacks on the law enforcement by criminals each year, averaging over 15 policemen being murdered in the line of duty each year. And the National Intelligence Bureau of Jamaica estimated that there were like 300 active gangs operating in Jamaica as recent as 2015. There is an incestuous connection between gangs and guns. Wherever there are gangs, there will be guns. And I'll explain a little bit about that in a while to come. But in a short period of time, 1986 to 2012, short period of time, the police in Jamaica seized over 12,000 illegal guns from criminals. In the same period of time, almost 170,000 rounds of live ammunition. This is not spent shells picked up on crime scenes. And we can speak a lot more about spent shell. In fact, there is one gang that called itself the shower posse. Shower meaning that when they are killing people, they shower them with bullets. So if we were to count the amount of rounds picked up at crime scenes and added to this number, you will see that criminals have acquired and deployed the kind of weapon systems in Jamaica over a very short period of time, sufficient to start and prosecute a small war. Over 85% of illegal guns seized by the police in Jamaica are properly manufactured handgun, light machine guns, and rifles, mainly of US origin. We are seeing where guns have been coming in from third countries now, out of countries in Europe and Asia. And there has been in recent years a growing trend of criminals swapping, exchanging, bartering illegal drugs, ganja, for guns, especially out of Haiti and other neighboring countries. Gangs actually transformed the Jamaican landscape into a lucrative market for transnational criminals who are involved in the trafficking of guns and ammunition. The demand for guns have actually changed the environment of the country. Wherever in the world that criminals have illegal guns and want to sell, they can always know that there is a ready market in Jamaica for illegal guns. The gangs, as I said before, they fuel the gun trade. They also began to emerge and transform themselves as a new set of social actors within the country. We saw where they actually started out doing petty robberies. But once they realized how the utility to the violence that they produce, they actually branched out into business activities, armed robbery on a long scale, sustainable state, extortion, protection, rackets, getting involved in major carjack rings, major frauds, stealing and selling commodities to other criminal groups, and also providing security for the then cocaine trade, which was emerging in Jamaica during the 1980s, etc. They actually created an accommodation for youngsters who were dropping out of broken homes, dropping out of school, remaining unemployed for too long, and just simply wanted an organization or a body of individuals to associate with. Professor Max Manwaring, a former Army colonel out of the United States, has done an extensive amount of work on gangs and written a lot. I've read many of what he has written, and there's a particular bit of work that he has done entitled Street Gang, the New Urban Insurgency. And in that document, he actually discussed the evolution of criminal gangs, giving us an opportunity to actually understand the various stages through which they evolve. And we have actually seen this pattern of evolution in gangs in Jamaica. At the very lowest level, we have the first generation gang, who are just loosely connected groups of youngsters, 3 or 4 or 5 of them, mainly involved in itinerant street robberies, etc. Sometimes the leadership of that gang may revolve around the person who owns the gun. Sometimes the gang may actually assume the name of that individual. One effective police operation, where it's a mass arrest, etc., could actually wipe out a gang like that. However, those gangs are prone to violence because they actually deploy violence against their victims. Second generation gangs, he reasoned, are larger groups of criminals who are involved in crime for profit. So they actually invest in criminal business. They will buy drugs and retail it. They will buy guns and rent them out or sell them out. They will involve themselves in extortion, protection. They are the ones that actually transport stolen goods, protect drug bases, and do various other forms of criminal activities. They too engage in levels of violence, which I'll discuss in a few minutes. Then there's the third generation gang, and these are criminals involved in crimes for profit, but also betraying political ambition. They want to find themselves in cozy relationships with members of the political leadership. So they sponsor campaigns. They actually enforce garrison politics to protect the tenure of some politicians in certain communities. At election campaign time, what they actually do is co-opt some of the smaller gangs and pay them to get involved in violence production, to intimidate voters or to kill voters. They actually burn people out of their communities if they don't believe they are going to vote a certain way. People have to run away from communities. They kill individuals and carry on all kinds of stuff. And their ultimate objective really is to have individuals in power who may either create public policies that are soft on crime or fail to enact the kind of legislations that are tough on criminals. And the unfortunate result or consequence of this is that if the rest of the world is tightening policies against organized crime, and there's 1 or 2 countries that are refusing to standardize their policy response to organized crime, all that happens is that the criminals shift their business into your country because it becomes criminal-free space. And Jamaica's experience is a clear example of a society that knows enough about organized crime, has felt it, has seen good examples around the world about how organized crime is dealt with, but we have failed to enact the right kind of legislations. Just recently, we had a limited state of public emergency in two parishes that actually resulted in a 21% drop in crime last year, murders last year. At the end of the year, the government went back to Parliament and tried to get it extended, and it was voted against by the political opposition. And back in 2010, when we had the major assault against the Tivoli Gardens gang, we had a limited state of public emergency for 30 days. We had work to do. We went back to the political authorities and begged them to extend the state of emergency. And the same opposition, which is now opposition, voted against it and we lost it. And that sends the wrong signal to the criminals that they actually have political support. And it also sends the wrong signal to the law enforcement professionals that you don't have the kind of policy support that you really need to execute an effective strategy against gang. Scholars are now looking at the possibility or the emergence of a 4th generation of criminals, gangsters. And these are the people who are sympathizers with gangsters, the public intellectuals who will take a song such as was mentioned earlier on by my colleague panelist, where the DJ is saying something about, I don't particularly remember yours, but there is one that says, keep some number on speed dial, right? So that the moment the guy is about to call the police or something like that, you can put a bullet in his head. There's one that says, when we are dealing with informers, we shot them, we bag them, we tag them, we light them, and burn them, right? There's one that talks about informer for dead, gunshot must lick up in an informer head. And we have highly educated Jamaicans who will sit for hours and rationalize and justify this kind of lyrics in songs. I call it gangster doctrine. Any organization, the military has its doctrine, the police have its doctrine, other organizations have their doctrine. And if you have 300 gangs with an estimated total of 3,000 operating in your country, a doctrine is going to get them together, and it is going to transmit new values to them which are contrary to the values of the society. So we have in Jamaica youngsters who have chosen greed over need. They have chosen all-night partying and all-day sleeping. Jamaica has free education right up through the high school level, and you have children who are dropping out of school at age 15, 16 and going into gang. Gangsters are motivated by greed. In the worst of times, societies will find enough to satisfy genuine needs. In the best of time, no society will have enough resources to satisfy greed. Gangsters will not stop. They have to be stopped. And we have found situations in Jamaica where the gangsters actually assume names from which they draw inspiration, but names that actually tell you what they're about, the kind of crimes they are involved in, what they do with witnesses and victims, etc. As I said before, I really don't have a lot of time to spend on it. The other point to be made about them is that they are territorial in nature. They capture and control many of our urban spaces and make some of those areas so dangerous that people move out of them. People buy homes in them and are afraid to even borrow money and invest in upgrading those facilities because they don't know when they have to run away and leave it. You have property in the country that are classified as dead capital. They can't be sold. Nobody will buy them. There are communities that nobody will move into. People only want to move out of them, all because of the presence and the activities of criminal gangs and the level of violence that they produce. I'm going to jump to a slide which actually tells us about the corrupting influence of the gangs. They have needs. They need facilitation. They need to launder and invest their ill-gotten gains, so they target businesses. They need to conceal their criminal activities. They need to seek to increase membership, and they go into aggressive recruitment. They create social destabilization activities that distract youngsters from their education and pull them into gangs. So they always have a pool of people ready to commit crimes for them. They need protection from other criminals. So therefore, once they are involved in gang activities, they must have guns. And I'll speak a little bit more about the type of violence that they commit. They engage in extravagant consumption and recreation, and they, as I said before, antisocial behavior. But look at the violence-producing nature of the gangs. Violence is used for internal discipline of members. Whenever a member falls out of line, they can't come to the police. They can't come to you and tell you that the guy was given a kilo of coke to take somewhere and he stole it. That is going to expose their criminal business. So they have to resort to self-help. And self-help is violence. And they can't whip him and send him home because he might tell somebody. So they kill him. So they kill their own. When it's time, gangsters do not retire. They don't grow old and retire on a pension. They have to either go to prison or be killed. And that is how they change leadership. They kill each other. And very often, when there's about to be a leadership transition in a gang, there's a spate of killings, and then the most ruthless takes over the gang. They are involved in fighting for capture and control of market space. There are gangs that want to be the only ones selling drugs on the street. They want to be the only ones collecting extortion in this area. They want to be the only ones collecting extortion off this road project work. They want to be the only ones providing labor for major road projects. And if there are other gangs that are encroaching on what they refer to as their market space, they are going to fight and they are going to kill people. They engage in revenge or reprisal killings. There are gangs in Jamaica, if they lose a significant member, they actually say, we want 10 dead for that. We don't want a one man dead for this man. This man is of significant importance to the gang. And they also kill family members, they kill associates, and there are times when they can't find any target to kill. What do? They go in a community and they drive by and shoot it up. They shoot up wakes, they shoot up funerals, they shoot up children parties, all kinds of stuff. They kill witnesses to cause criminal charges against themselves to collapse. Witnesses have to be put into protective custody. There is a case going on in the Jamaican courts right now, a trial of the Uche and Wilson gang. That witness is giving evidence from a remote location via video link. He can't show his face in court. He can't come to court. Nobody can know where he is. And guess who is that witness? A former gang member, a former member of the same gang. He has been on the witness stand for nearly 4 weeks now. And the kind of information which is coming out in evidence about the gang, you would never believe. He even organized to rob his own relatives when he was in the gang with them. They engage in contract killings, in kidnappings, in robberies. They also engage in shaping, they create violence and disorder in certain communities, especially business districts, and shape an environment of fear and anxiety so that they can then go to the business people and say, pay us protection money and we'll push the crime down. Pay us and your business space will not be broken into. Your staff won't be robbed. Your customers won't be robbed. There won't be shootings in front of your business, so you have to drop shutter on a busy day when you could be doing good business. They also use violence to enforce a code of conduct in certain vulnerable communities so that citizens will see crime and are terrified to report them to the police. There are citizens who see crime and have to get a message through a third person to the gangsters to say, I was not there. Don't make anybody tell you that I was there and saw it. Right? I didn't see it. There are times when the police have success in certain communities and they just go and kill some people randomly and just leak some information that they are police informer. The poor people sometimes don't know what they are killed for. But that is one of their tactics to insecurity of persons, community, critical sectors. Come to you in a minute. And they actually damage the country's image with a high level of violence and insecurity, so much so that in recent weeks, in the midst of our winter tourist season, we actually got a U.S. travel advisory issue about Jamaica and gang violence. The year when we are about to break all records with tourism numbers, this is what has hit us. So in terms of operational response to the gangs, my tenure as Commissioner of Police, with the support of Major General Saunders at the time, we mounted a counter-gang strategy. We call it the 6D strategy. We were very keen on disrupting the gangs. We arrested them for every offense possible. And if sometimes we arrest them for their good looks. Once it's an offense, they are arrested. We put them in the courts. If we have them on 10 offenses, we give them different court dates. So every day of the week, they had a case in court. So if they miss one court date, a bench warrant is issued, and you can arrest them for that. We seized their guns. We tried to deny them freedom of movement and freedom of action with the many roadblocks, spot checks, stop and search, seizure of cars, etc. We defended the communities against them because once you find out that they pose this kind of threat to the community, you have to have consistent police presence in there. It can't be random patrols anymore. You have to find the hotspots and fix the police presence inside of them. We disarm the gangs by taking away the guns. We use Crime Stop. We pay money for people who call and give information about guns they have launched. A Get the Gun campaign in Jamaica. We reward and commend policemen who seize guns and ammunition during the course of their operations. We try to dissuade and deter people from joining gangs, and we deny them the pleasure of enjoying the proceeds of their ill-gotten gain by using the proceeds of crime hacked against them. I am sorry I can't go any further because I have been given the wrap-up signal, but I thank you all, and I think during the question and answer session, if there's something you want to raise with me, I could answer it.
Thank you, Commissioner. Next, we have Dwinette Eversley, who is the country manager for USAID for the CFYR project. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Honorable Prime Minister, honorable members of government, senior representatives of the Ministry of National Security and the Protective Services here in St. Kitts and Nevis, distinguished fellow panelists, distinguished members who are in the public virtually and here this evening with us. It's good to have you. My name is Dwinette Eversley, and it's not Dwinette or anything else. Since I've not lived in the country of my birth, wherever I come, and I must say I love being here in St. Kitts and Nevis, but I realize Dwinette is sometimes difficult. So in my younger years, in which I find myself now, I have taken to be called Didi. It's much easier. So as indicated by the moderator, I am the country manager for the USAID-funded Community Family and Youth Resilience Program. And I want to introduce my colleague, who is really the secondary prevention specialist in charge of the program I'm going to present briefly. Speaking about gangs is sensational, it's exciting, because it's something we want to get rid of. But I am going to bring a bit different perspective. I am going to speak about a program that we are implementing for young people between the ages of 11 to 17 that assesses their risks for gang involvement and works with them and their families to address and remove, where possible, that behavior. Because you would have heard very eloquently said by our first speaker, the commissioner. I don't know, somebody in this room might be prophetic. No, I'm joking. You all needed to wake up, so that was a joke. No laugh. But what he did say, and what the second speaker did reiterate, addressing the issue of gang involvement means addressing the factors that predispose young people to gang involvement, and families are very important in that equation. So I shall describe what we are doing as part of our program. Briefly, our Community Family and Youth Resilience Program is a part of a wider, comprehensive, project implemented by USAID in 10 countries in the Eastern and Southern Caribbean. Our component, which is called Community Family and Youth Resilience, works exactly as it says it does, with communities, with young people, and with families to prevent youth violence, youth involvement in violence. And we have been, and to do that, we apply the public health approach to violence prevention, which means it's a scientific assessment of the problems that predispose people to violence or gang activity or risk. We identify those causes. We assess the factors, and we develop or we implement protective and resilience mechanisms as a countermeasure to those risk factors. We implement interventions after they have been tested and adapted to the local situation. And then we continue to process, assess, evaluate, redeploy, scale up. So it's a model. This is the model this is the approach that we use. And I'm going to present the model that we have been working with since August 2017 which is our, Family Matters model. And this is a program, again, as I said, the funder is the USAID, and our office, the CFYI program, is implementing. And there are other agencies based on the need to test, to evaluate, and to ensure what we are delivering for and with families in the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis is not guesswork, it is sound, and it will make a difference. And the chief implementing partner of the government in Kitts and Nevis for the program that I am presenting, the Family Matters Services model, is the Ministry of Community Development, Gender Affairs and Social Services, and in that unit is the counseling unit. As I will show in the next few minutes, the most critical part of the entire equation are the young people, 11 to 17, as I mentioned, and families. Our program deals with what we call index youth, but it also engages at every stage their families. So what is this model that we have been using? Well, it is a program that was implemented some time ago as part of the Los Angeles Mayor's Office of Gang Reduction and Youth Development. It's called GRID, and it was implemented as the Prevention and Intervention Family Systems model. So this is something that was tested. All of the police and law enforcement officers in this room are very well aware of how explosive the gang situation was in Los Angeles. You will know also that of the models that would have been tried and tested, and I want us to keep this in the back of our head because it again resonates with what was said by an earlier speaker. Whatever any one agency does, it must align within the larger national ecosystem that seeks to prevent antisocial behaviors, that seeks to reduce young people's involvement in crime and violence. Please keep that in the back of your head. So this system that we have adopted in St. Kitts and Nevis, and I also want to make it clear that what we are doing in St. Kitts and Nevis as part of this USAID funded program is also being implemented in St. Lucia and in Guyana. In St. Kitts and Nevis, we work in 5 communities. And if you want to ask why are we working in 5 communities, well, before our program started, based on a series of primary research, and of course based on secondary data available from the police and other sources, we identified communities that are at highest risk of gang involvement and of violent crime. Violent crime means murder and other such acts. And that is the reason that our 5 communities in St. Kitts and Nevis are in Basseterre, and in Basseterre we focus on McKnight, Newton, and Village. We work in Keon, we work in Sandy Point, and we also work in St. John's and Fig Tree and in St. George, Gingerland. So this program, on which our Family Matters Services model is based, was adapted and customized from the Los Angeles Mayor's Office of Gang Reduction Youth Development model, comprised of 2 main phases: a diagnostic phase, which I'll talk more about, and of course, a phase working with families. Now, the diagnostic phase examines whether a young person, I gave you the age, 10 to 17, has risk factors. These are risk factors, and if they are predisposed to a high level of risk. Risk factors that are measured relate to antisocial tendencies, weak parental supervision, critical life events, and when we were doing our testing of the YSET model, we did find that a few of the young people in our communities were involved or exposed to these critical life events, many of which were they had witnessed a member of their family being shot in front of them. But you know, a critical life event that changes a child's life is also a divorce. So, but we were struck by the number who had witnessed somebody who was murdered in front of them, or a family member who had been placed in the penal system. Impulsive risk tendencies, you know what that is. Guilt neutralization. Guilt neutralization, oh, well, you know, the police does it, or, you know, somebody else does it. Anything to rationalize why a young person may engage in an action that is illegal or known to be against the laws. Negative peer influence, peer delinquency, etc. These are the risk factors that we measure when we are identifying whether a young person qualifies for consideration into this model, this system that we are offering. And so a lot of our work last year in deploying the Family Matters services was engaging partners to identify young people for testing, and the Ministry of Education was very excellent in working with us, giving us data on youth populations 10 to 17 in all public schools in St. Kitts and Nevis. We sensitized all the social services, youth development, other partners that would have been involved in understanding and adopting the model, a lot of training for the persons who were going to go out and implement the tool with young people in their home. Then we actually had to test the model. We had to test even the YSET, the Youth Service Eligibility Tool, for young people to understand, to say whether or not they understood the questions that were being posed, because it was important for them to reply factually, so that based on the test, the scoring would say whether or not they demonstrated 3 or more risk factors that would qualify them for consideration for recruitment. But all of that, bear in mind, we had to get the parental consent for the testing, and even if your parent consented, the child had to say, yes, I don't mind doing this test too. So what you have in front of you is all the phases that we went through in adopting this model in St. Kitts and Nevis. And so when all of that was done, we did the training, we applied the tool, we had young people who, based on the scoring, had demonstrated 3 or more risk factors. Family counselors were deployed who were trained. And we now have family counselors on the field working in the 5 communities. What does that mean? Well, fortunately, as I mentioned before, in all the countries in which we are implementing the Family Matters model, we have had the biggest level of commitment from the government entity involved in the program. And this is no mean feat. We are excited about it because it augurs well for sustainability. As I indicated to you, it's being managed by the counseling unit. And we trained and recruited under a grant agreement with the Community Family and Youth Resilience Program, 8 family counselors who are currently working with us, working on the phases that you see above there. They have a family counselor so that you understand what we do. We have 70 families, that is index youth and their families, identified as eligible for the program and who have agreed. There were more families, youth, who were identified as eligible, but not all families agreed. Again, it is up to the families to say, yes, this is a way that we see that is valid to make a difference in our child and to make a difference in their resilience and their protective factors. So currently we have 8 family counselors working in 3 strategy teams for 70 families in the 5 communities I mentioned. The counselors they meet with the designated youth, we call it the index youth. All these meetings take home within the family, within their home. It's an exercise that is designed to enhance resilience, to enhance family strengths, and in a very real way to help parents remember how to parent. I am not at liberty to indicate what happens in those sessions, but I can tell you that our family counselors comment that parents, even the index youth, are very excited by the fact that parenting is not a negative intervention. I will repeat that because it bears reference to what the speaker who just completed his presentation said. Gangs are units where people find positive reinforcement, but your positive reinforcement should come from your family. So if you got 10 out of 25 for a test, it was a good job and you can do better. It's not always an occasion for sanction and negative reinforcement, or not supporting the child to feel better about themselves. So our strategies with the family counselors work at horizontal strategies where they are reinforcing positive behaviors, and the horizontal strategy means if an index youth in a family agrees to something, that's something that is defined within the unit as a whole is done. And if the parent, the single mother or the single father, whoever is not there to see that it's done, there's accountability contract with somebody else. It makes people, in a very real way, it enhances the level of communication and the level of caring in a family. And something that we forgot, and when we learned about this aspect of our program, it was very exciting for us, and it is very exciting, I think, in a Caribbean context, because the vertical strategy speaks to strengthening multi-generational positives, making connections beyond persons who are directly in the home, looking at the old auntie and the granny and talking about traditions that are reinforcing. Oh, I never knew that happened. Reinforcing things that are strong, that are positive. This is not an attempt to go through in detail what happens as part of the work that the family counselors do with the index youth and their families. This is just to indicate that our work is about reinforcing strengths and building protective factors with the young people so that when they are tested again after a 6-month period of intervention, we can assess whether the work has been successful. And what you have on the screen are I indicated, and I will reiterate, that no matter what we do at the level of CFYR with our excellent partner, the Counseling Department of the Ministry of Social Services and Gender and so on, and Community Development, there is a community of practice that has to be involved. For this activity to be sustained, young people must be available, and their families, index youth and their families must be able to assess a range of services in other agencies, whether it's probation services, whether it's protection services, whatever. But that must be available within the national ecosystem in a seamless way. And this is part of the interagency protocol that is currently before the Probation and Child Welfare Board to be approved, and as we understand, part of a wider comprehensive level of social supports and services that the government is looking to solidify. What are important lessons? Well, this is the first phase, and after 6 months of implementation, we'll be able to assess what has been the level, what has been the impact. Already in Guyana, after 6 months, we have seen some impacts. We have seen some level of reduction in risk factors displayed. So, for example, we have seen 56% of the index youth that entered the program, there was a reduction in the risk factors. There was a complete, and so that means there are positive, very positive examples, very positive trends that we would have to build on as we move forward. And there is already, we are currently in the second year of our grant funding for this program. We have had, very importantly, the Commit Support Unit. And that is what makes it so important, because all the services, the social services, need to come together to make this really excellent. And there is such a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to measure over time how, in 5 or 10 years, a program such as this would have significantly reduced young people's involvement in gangs. And this is what we want to see, because it has happened. As you would see on the screen, that has been the results in other countries where it has been implemented. And so I try to maintain my time. Woman power, we always maintain our time, don't we? And so once you need more, if you have questions on this, please contact my colleague, and I've put her email address and her number on the screen. Thank you so very much. Thank you very much, RSS. I feel now like I won an Academy Award. Thank you very much, RSS, for inviting me.
Thank you. Our last speaker tonight is Anthony Clayton on policy responses to the gang phenomenon. He's a faculty member, a professor of sustainable development at the University of West Indies in Jamaica. He's going to be joining us online. It looks, there's a thumbs up, so I assume that means we're moving forward. Dr. Clayton.
Okay, can you see my slide? You can? Very good. Can you angle the camera so that I can see them too? Okay. I'm going to be talking this evening. First, can I say good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very sorry that I couldn't be with you in person. I'm going to be talking about some of the risk factors that I think affect the level of gang activity in the Caribbean. And then for one click, please. Oh, you're not seeing the slides, it's good. Okay, thank you. All right, are you ready? You ready? Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about the factors that I think will have a bearing on the level of gang activity in the Caribbean, and then talk about the policy responses again. First click, please. One click. Can you advance to the second slide, please? Can you go to the second slide, please? Go back one slide, please. Okay, so these are, I think, the 5 factors that we need to discuss. One is the existing level of violence in the Caribbean, which in many countries is exceptionally high. The second is the social and political contact. The third is the increasing overlap between criminal and terrorist structures. The fourth is the current situation in Venezuela. And the fifth is cybercrime, in particular what's happening in social media. Let me go through all of these fairly quickly. So the first factor is patterns of violence. You should now be looking at the fourth slide. In a typical year, we have 550,000 violent deaths. Most of them are the result of war and terrorism. Typically, 70–75% of them are the result of crime and domestic violence. This is actually the largest war in the world. This pattern of killing is highly concentrated because around most of the world, the homicide rate has been falling steadily since 1985. There are really just 2 or 3 examples. One of them is Latin America and Caribbean, and the other is Sub-Saharan Africa. There are a number of factors in common in pretty much all of these places. One of them is you have typically weak or corrupt governments, readily available weapons, broken families, many unemployed men, pattern of rapid and chaotic urbanization, crowded prisons, available narcotics, ungovernable spaces, and high-level criminals beyond reach of police. Next slide, please. I'll be looking at a map of the world. And what this shows is the level of homicide in different regions. In relatively stable parts of the world, like Europe, the homicide rate is about 1 per 100,000. Average for the planet is about 7 per 100,000. Developed countries in Africa at 11 per 100,000. One click, please. In the epicenter, which is Latin America and Caribbean, inside that red ring that you should not be seeing on the screen, the average homicide rate is 32 per 100,000. And inside that inner red, which is Central America and Caribbean, the average homicide rate is about 52 per 100,000. If you look at the statistics, if you look at the distribution by nation, then 8 out of the 10 most violent countries in the world are in that inner ring. Move on to the next slide. You should now be looking at a map of Central America and the Caribbean. And what you're seeing, every country marked with a red arrow is in the world's top 10 for homicide. Every country marked with a blue arrow is in the world's top 20 for homicide. And this is no coincidence or structural reasons why this is the highest level. This is the world's epicenter of criminal and violence. One click, please. Now we're going to go on to look at the social and economic context. One click, please, one slide. And these examples are all drawn from Jamaica. You have here a situation where you have communities where you suffer from deeply entrenched poverty in a country with very high levels of inequality. Some people live brought up. That helps to contribute to a context of ignorance, the erosion of moral legitimacy of government and corruption and patronage, and links between politics and organized crime, which we have never yet managed to sever. There, when you have the high levels of violence as a result, they're a very effective deterrent to investment, which perpetuates economic underdevelopment. Readily available narcotics and weapons, the weapons coming in to a lesser extent and increasingly from Venezuela. Still a dysfunctional justice system, although some reforms are now starting, and the police force, which is still got some way to go in terms of becoming a fully modern police operation. Commissioner Owen Ellington and his commission started that process. The current commissioner is taking that further now. One click, please. Part of the problem is that we have really two deeply rooted patterns of crime in Jamaica. One of them is the economic crime for profit, and the other is the level of violence, and really have quite different characteristics. When the politicians talk about crime, they are typically talking about violence. They want to bring down the level of violence. They are much more reluctant to engage the other form of crime, which is corruption, because that is the part in which many politicians and people in public life are implicated. So what they want to do is bring down the level of violence, but not address the problems of which they are actually beneficiaries. Unfortunately, you cannot address one without also addressing the other. One click, please. Now we're looking at the third factor, next click, which is the increasing connections between criminality and terrorism. What you're seeing on the screen now is a quote from the White House Strategy to Combat Transnational Organized Crime. And what it points out there is that today's criminal networks are engaged in a very wide range of illicit activities, including cybercrime and support for terrorism. And that's a two-way relationship. One click, please. Partly because Islamic State has developed a particular skill at recruiting disaffected youth with prior criminal records. Back in the early years of this century, when before the rise of Islamic State, about a quarter of the known jihadist militants in Europe had prior criminal convictions. By 2015, this was up to about 50% of known jihadists in Europe. And that simply reflected the way that Islamic State became skilled at recruiting people with prior criminal records and giving them a cause that they could believe in. One click, please. You should now be looking at a photograph of some of the guys from Trinidad who went to fight in Syria. Of course, Trinidad now has a particular problem because some of the foreign fighters are now returning to Trinidad and potentially are going to contribute significantly to their problems there. One click, please. We're now going to look at the issues concerning Venezuela. One click, please. Here's a snapshot of the problems that we're already experiencing from Venezuela. That at the current rates of increase of inflation, the IMF reckons that inflation rate in Venezuela will reach 10 million% by the end of this year. There are already about 3 million people who have fled from Venezuela because they're starving. Over 2 million of those, about 2.5 million of those, just left over the last 3-4 years. The UN estimates that there are now 100,000 Venezuelans in Trinidad. The largest number went over the border into Colombia, But for Trinidad to absorb 100,000 refugees is absolutely extraordinary. Back in Trinidad, you have multiple armed groups, in militias, armed gangs, groups with political regime, including some former terrorists from over the border in Colombia, and prison gangs, pranes, who have also got links to the regime. And there's now an increasingly serious risk that the armed forces will fragment. Already about 1,000 soldiers have defected into Colombia, and the militias will come bandas criminales backroom. So Venezuela is now well on the way to becoming a failed state. One click, please, with a very high level of gun ownership. Minimum estimate 6.5 million guns in Venezuela, and a lot of them are being trafficked out of the country. One click, please. Especially into Trinidad. You should now be looking at the map of Venezuela and Trinidad. There's a very short stretch of water between the two countries. There are reports of some boats making 3 trips a day between the two countries. One click, please. With guns, narcotics, and humans going one way, and things like food, pharmacy supplies, and diapers going the other way. One click, please. We're now going to talk briefly about cybercrime and social media. One click, please. The transition to a fully digital economy and digital society offers many, many new opportunities for development. Unfortunately, criminals see this the same way. They see the same opportunities. In the course of a single year, the European Union found 54,000 websites put up by Islamic State with information on how to construct improvised explosive devices, and 2/3 of that information were shared within 2 hours of posting. So it's now possible for terrorists to get that information out into gangs and criminal structures anywhere in the world. One click, please. Organized crime makes full use of cybercrime. It's now the largest and most lucrative form of crime in the world, generating an estimated $6 trillion a year. Platform criminality, which is a subset, is estimated at $1.5 trillion a year. And this is using the well-known platforms, including Amazon and Facebook, for dealing narcotics, money laundering, human trafficking, distributing counterfeit goods. One click, please. And finally, the advent of widespread social media has given people, malign actors, a new way to influence the outcome of political events and elections. US Special Counsel Robert Mueller filed indictments against 13 Russian nationals 1 year ago. They were members of a team that made 150,000 fake social media postings per day on YouTube, Facebook, and so forth, using virtual private networks, so the postings appeared to be coming out of the USA, not Russia. We don't know how big an impact this had on the election. It may have been on the last presidential election. It may have been as much as 1 to 2% of the vote, in which case these people may have actually made Trump president. Now, this gives criminals and terrorists the opportunity to interfere in our elections the way they've never been able to do so before. One click, please. Now we'll start to talk about solutions. One click, please. The essence of what we need to do is use an approach. We have to have evidence-based policies. Now, this is something which I don't understand why a lot of politicians find it quite hard to grasp, that policies actually have to be based on something more than gut feeling and instinct. They have to be based on actual research and evidence. And I'll share with you a couple of examples, if I may. One is the homicide rate in Cali, Colombia. In 1994, that homicide rate was 124 per 100,000 people. A project running under the mayor found that most of the murders were linked to bars and alcohol. And simply by bringing in restrictions on alcohol and gun ownership, reduced the homicide rate within a very short space of time by 1/3. One click, please. Second example was the city of Rio de Janeiro. The homicide rate, the citywide homicide rate, was 42 per 100,000 in 2005. It was over 80 per 100,000 in the favelas, in the ghetto communities. They introduced the pacifying police program in 2008. 4 years later, the city homicide rate was down by 50%. And in some of the favelas, it was actually down to 0. And in Jamaica, we introduced a new program, the Zones of Special Operation, the ZOSOs, and the State of Emergency Operations. We had 2 of each. National homicide rate was down by 20%. This was essentially the same program, the sequel to the program that Owen Ellington described. And yet again, it was sabotaged politically. The opposition voted against the renewal, and the homicide rate is now starting to climb again. It is unfortunate but inescapably true that at some point we have to start to address the fact that many politicians benefit from organized crime. And if we cannot sever the link between our political systems and organized crime, we will never get to the bottom of this problem. One click, please. And that's just to say, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much.
For questions and answers, comments from those of you that have joined us tonight. I believe that we have some folks who are going to be coming around with some microphones to allow people to make some questions. So just give us 1 second.
Go on.
Good night to everyone, and good night to the head table. Now, I'm just glad that I could be here to see this farmac from the Regional Security Forces and the presentation that you all bring to our Federation of Sinkies and Navies. And one of the things I would like to bring forward as seeing the former Commissioner of Jamaica make a presentation, and I would like to ask you, being the former commissioner, you say that crime spoiled from when Jamaica got inception of independence in 1962. I would like to say some of the factors you have is wrong. Why we say that? Because before 1962, there was crime rate hitting our people when we working on the plantation. So that is valued as crime. You see? We have to really take stock of what really hit us. And the aspect of what we're looking at really, we got to realize that the criminal activities don't stem in our community. It stems from the money-making trade that called corruption. So we will say that in these avenues of our small developing countries them around the region, we are not the ones who are faster in crime. We are just the victim of the system. And reason why we say so, because if you say that the gangs them have elevated to incorporate more people to their gang members, how come you all didn't stop the detection of these resources that you all know about? That is my question to you, Mr. Former Commissioner.
I'm not sure I understand that thing you said.
You say you don't understand what I say, right?
No, you made some comments which I don't need to comment on. What seems to me to be a question you're posing is how come you did not detect?
You all, not you yourself, because you cannot be one man alone.
Yeah, man, just repeat what you said. How come you did not detect?
How you all did not detect the rising of the criminal activity that played in Jamaica and even spread out to the west part of the Caribbean region, because there is infiltration come from the CIA and the FBI agent, why so much gun is on our shores, and we ain't fear to say so.
So you have answered the question? Have you answered the question? Well, I'm not going to be responding to certain of the assertions being made, but what I can tell you is that the police have been investigating all the crimes reported, and they actually know what was behind the crime. The problem is that the law enforcement policies which are in place to deal with some of these violent crimes are not effective in dealing with them because the criminal environment has changed. In fact, it was only in 2014 that Jamaica actually enacted legislation to deal with organized crime and gangs. That law is 5 years old. The police have made over 400 arrests under that law. In fact, the very first case being tried under the law is in the courts now, and it involves 26 members of one gang. So if public policies do not keep pace with the changing strategies and tactics of criminals, you will find the numbers rising, but the response is not being effective.
Well, why don't we go ahead then and start off with taking a few steps through some of the basic issues involving gangs in most communities. One of them is related to gang culture and the relationship between younger gang members in their community as well as those who are older or more chronically involved gang members. We know that most gang members do not stay in a gang for longer than 1 or 2 years, but we do know that there are a small number that do, and they are much more involved in violence, much more involved in drug use and drug sales and crime. And so I didn't know if any of the panelists were interested in talking about the relationship between younger gang members and their communities with older gang members.
What we find happening in St. Kitts from a localized perspective is that the older gang members are developing a new trend where they are using juveniles to commit most of their crime because they believe that the juveniles cannot be sentenced to hard time in prison. And so the gang recruitment is getting younger and younger because the older guys have been through the system, they know the system, and they're very much afraid of being arrested and put away for a very long time. And so this is a new trend that we're seeing happening. And so that is why programs like the Youth Explore groups and our policing, community policing initiative are so important to reach those at-risk youths in the primary school and in the secondary schools, because that is where the gangs are now changing their philosophy toward the mode of operation.
And so how does that look in Jamaica? How does that differ and how is it similar to what's going on in Jamaica?
In fact, it's similar in the sense that the gangsters, they are smart people. They study the law, they study the criminal justice system, they understand that public policies on the treatment of young offenders are different from how they treat adult offenders. And so they aggressively recruit youngsters who are below the age that they are held responsible for crimes and use them to peddle drugs, transport guns, transport drugs, and actually sell drugs in school. This is something that the gangs do aggressively, right? They recruit the youngsters so that they can take advantage of the fact that law enforcement does not treat young offenders in the same way that they treat mature offenders. The other thing is that once the gangsters start accumulating resources, they want the good life. So they don't want to be running away and hiding from the police all the time. So they want youngsters who are going to be on the front line, doing the offenses, getting killed, getting arrested, whilst they stay behind the shadows and live in upscale apartments, drive around in luxurious cars, spend time in hotels, travel in and out of the country. It's no coincidence that it happens. It's deliberate, it's a strategy, and the only way to be able to counter that is to focus on the youth at risks with the diversion policies, but at the same time use the anti-gang law, because there are elements of that law that deals with recruitment of youngsters into gang. And like I said before, this case which we have before the court now It's a test case on how effective the law is going to be. The people are charged for many offenses. I think it's about 50 counts, which also include recruitment. And we're actually watching to see how, first of all, if we get a conviction, and how the court will deal with the issue of aggressive recruitment, especially of youngsters by gangs. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Related to the issue of youth is also issues related to gender. We know that younger gang members are much more likely to be female than older gang members, which are much more likely to be males. What are you seeing, whether it be St. Kitts, Jamaica, Guyana, St. Lucia, in terms of the gender composition of gangs in your nations and the impact that they're having on the gang?
In Jamaica, it's the opposite. Gang membership is substantially males because of the things they have to do. It's really division of labor. They want people to be running up and down with guns, robbing, creating problems, extorting, peddling drugs, and doing all kinds of stuff. The ladies are not going to be doing that. Females are recruited in gangs to do a number of things. They visit prisoners in custody. They have females who are recruited and put under the management of women who just find the gangsters wherever they are in prison, visit them, take drugs to them, take clothing to them, take cell phones to them, corrupt the lockup staff, take messages from them back into the community, and watch. They actually hang out around the courthouses and watch witnesses who come, watch the policemen who are involved in the case, try and approach the policemen, sweet talk them, try and get them corrupt. So they actually give them tasks to perform. The young men, on the other hand, are recruited mainly as foot soldiers to do the dirty work. And that's the way we see it playing out in Jamaica. Division of labor, functions that are best performed by individuals because of their gender and the kind of access they may have, and the fact that their natural appearance of innocence can deceive many individuals. Yeah.
Sorry. Charles, I would have wanted to indicate that I think the problem is more insidious and it's extremely complex. When we were doing the testing for the YSET, we encountered a 14-year-old who was in state services because she had accepted and hidden weapons for somebody who's involved in criminal activities. And these are criminal activities, being in possession of a gang. The literature tells us, and I'm not speaking from actual evidence of what I know in St. Kitts, I want to make that clear, but the literature tells us there are young women who are recruited as lieutenants to help criminal activities, hide guns, drive getaway cars, and the dynamics of their recruitment, whether they are involved in intimate partner relationships or not, those are things that require further studies. Because they are also, it's a criminal activity and they are going to be facing the same sort of criminal penalties if they are if they are found with ammunition, etc., etc. I think it's not a matter that they look innocent. It's not also a matter that any young woman or young man who is intimately and intricately involved in a gang activity will ever be caught. There was a very well published case in my own country where a young woman was found dead, Prestige High School, excellent family, who was involved with a gang member and involved in selling drugs, etc., etc. So I don't know, and perhaps the Assistant Commissioner will be able to say what kind of research and data we have on those instances at all in this federation, whether they are occurring, and what are the gender and other programs to build resilience, and also programs to manage and eliminate violence, because some of these relationships are violent relationships. Certainly those things bear more interrogation.
what we found is that females have proven to be the most deadliest of agents in the gang culture. And why we say this? Because women have the ability to move across enemy lines with innocence. And they are the better surveillance agents because of this freedom of movement. Not very often we see females being the target of gang violence. But we have had cases where gangsters recruit females in enemy territory. And like the lyrical content of the song, they just make one phone call and we all know what is the result of that phone call. We have had instances where females have seek jobs in casinos, business places, and work for a period of time and set up robberies. And they do this with innocence. The police, the managers would not suspect a young female between the age 18 to 25 to be associated with these gangsters, because it's only by luck and chance you'll see a female who works in the bank, who works in the hotel, walking in the streets with a known gangster. And so it is very important that as law enforcement officers and practitioners, we don't turn a blind eye to the female element of the gang culture, because they have proven to be the secret weapon of the gang leaders.
Great, thank you. Yes, sir.
Okay, good evening. Just two things I'm looking at for now. What can be done with the lyrical content that we are saying is a big contributor to the psyche of the current gang members and those young persons who are emulating these persons, and they have a conduit, so to speak, through these popular people, right? So you have two persons playing in their minds. The gangster that live a kind of a life, money, girls, power, and you have the celebrity status. So how can we deal with something like that? Then the other thing, not just only in Jamaica, but I believe in almost every society. How do we address a community now that has embraced the activities, the people? I think I can recall there was a state in the US, maybe you can correct me, where the people just say, look man, hey, we got to take back our streets. But people, I don't know. But the thing is, the society has to realize something. So how can we mobilize society to reject these activities?
Let me respond to that. Because we actually had the experience in Jamaica when we were about to enact the anti-gang law, 2014. I was actually asked to, and I'll send a copy of it to the RSS, to make a submission to a joint select committee of Parliament in support of that bit of legislation. And there was one particular recommendation that we made, and I think it should have been addressed in section 15 of the law, which is to criminalize certain lyrical contents of songs that promote or advocate violence and the killing of witnesses and informants, etc. And it was opposed by the parliamentary opposition, and it was never enacted. I mean, even though the Minister of National Security at the time, no, it was actually opposed by members of parliament in his party at the time, and it was never enacted. And so we ended up with a situation where you can produce a song and you can call for the killing of witnesses or informers or anyone. And it's not an offense in Jamaica because we are guaranteed freedom of expression under the Constitution. I'm not too sure if the advocating of murder and the killing of people because they hold different views is really legitimate expression, but then I'm not a legislator. The other question you asked was how do we address the issue of communities embracing gangs? From my experience, 34 years of it in law enforcement in Jamaica, very few communities, if any, embrace the gangs. The gangs capture the community. They use violence, intimidation, coercion. They make social investments in the community. They promote back-to-school treats, parties, dances, all of those things, and actually win the hearts and minds of citizens in a very crude sense, because if people want to reject that, they are killed. Some of them burnt out of their homes. They have to leave the community. There's a very famous photograph, maybe video, which you may have seen around the 2010 when we were attempting to arrest Christopher Dudus Coke for extradition. 700 women dressed in white marching around Kingston with placards. Jesus died for us, we'll die for Dudus. Next to God, Dudus, and Dudus is innocent, etc. They weren't doing it voluntarily, you know. Any woman who had refused to do it would have had to move out of Tivoli Gardens. Right? But there's an appearance out there that the communities embrace the gang. The truth is that citizens would rather live in a safe, secure community where the protectors are the accountable agents of the state. Not gangsters who will send for their teenage daughters and rape them, who will hang people up and beat them to death, who will be peddling drugs in the community and doing all kinds of criminal activities. No self-respecting community wants that. The self-respecting communities want the police to be effective in countering gang activities. And the self-respecting communities want their sons and daughters who are being attracted to gangs to be diverted away from gang activities, to pursue their education and become valuable citizens in the community. But if left for too long, the community will actually resign itself over to the control of the gangs. Right? Thank you.
Yes, sir. And I don't know your name at the head table because when your presentation was given from your end. So can you please tell me your name at the head table?
Charles Katz.
And where you're from, please?
United States.
Welcome to St. Kitts and Nevis in our shores.
Thank you.
And I hope you're having a nice time. But one of the things I would like to emphasize on is that I'm a Rastafari and a member of the Rastafari Bingiti Yakusiada. And we find when we make our strive as a community activist, we're being targeted by police and army because we use our hub as our sacrament. And I would like to ask you, seeing that you're coming from America, if you find that these things that being implemented as the use of saying that hub is a job, which in we say is not a job because that's being put in on the table from, for instance, we're seeing that the police, them still coming in our camp, our social gathering, just Sunday gone, and being violating our constitutional rights, that even though we outline the Constitution to the police officer, he indicated that he must go with something. So I like how I see the commissioner of police who's here tonight. We're making this plea here tonight to tell your police and your officers them, when they see the Rastafari and you bring it here because you are the gathering, please do not come in our gathering. We don't have no guns, we don't have no cocaine. Where the cocaine them be, you all must go all in Figgy Bay. And where you all cannot even kick down those doors because it's protecting them. And we ain't fear to say so. You all have a safe night.
Interesting. Thank you for those comments. We do have some online questions that are coming through. One of the questions from the online community that are watching this session is, has criminal deportees impacted on the evolution of the gang culture in the Caribbean, and if so, in what ways?
Okay, from Sinki's perspective, of course, we have had our challenges with criminal deportees. In fact, one of the leaders of one of our main gang in St. Kitts is a deportee from out of United States of America. And what we find happening is that these deportees, they come back to the country of birth, and they have been exposed to more sophisticated way of committing crime. They have built networks with major crime syndicates in the United States, guns and drugs. And we all know the result of the guns and drugs on our streets.
Yeah, I mean, we've done actually a little bit of work in that area, both in the Caribbean as well as Latin America, El Salvador and Honduras. And one of the complicating factors is that these aren't always formal arrangements, but are oftentimes informal arrangements. Somebody will move to the States because they meet somebody, they have a job, they could be in Canada, they could be in a whole host of locations for a variety of reasons. Themselves or their children will become involved in a gang, and then for whatever reason, they'll be required to move back to, whether it be the Caribbean, a nation within the Caribbean, or El Salvador or Honduras, and they'll find that the rules of the game have changed, right? And they'll find that gangs have a different culture, they have different expectations, and then there are also differences in responses to gangs themselves in those nations. As a consequence, we have a whole different gang setup depending upon what nation you're communicating about and what you're talking about. The gang culture in the United States is very different than in the Caribbean, which is very different than what's taking place in Latin America, and it has to do with the intersection between culture, gang organization, as well as firearms availability. We have a lot of technology now that allows us to understand where guns are coming from, right? When the police confiscate a gun, right? We have a lot of information about that at this point. I don't think there's any doubt that we know where guns are coming from, right? They're coming from the United States almost exclusively for a variety of reasons. And so immigration, I think, plays a role, but not necessarily always in a formal way, but also in terms of informal relationships that are developed as a consequence of people moving back and forth for very legitimate reasons, whether it be relationships, jobs, family, and the such.
We actually have seen where criminal deportees have used organizing skills to form gangs in areas that never normally had that kind of problem. They also established the extortion protection rackets in communities that were peaceful for generations. They bring a different level of ruthlessness to the criminal activities that they commit. They maintain their links, because it's not like an individual is deported out of the USA or Canada or the UK, and he is not coming from an organization. More often than not, they are members of gangs in those countries involved in drug dealing, gun running, robberies, etc. So they maintain their links, they get gun supplies to Jamaica, And they also continue with trafficking in drugs. You have to understand, the impact of criminal deportation on small states. It's far more, difficult, challenging than a large society. You take a small country like St. Kitts, 50,000, you get 10 violent criminals deported to St. Kitts. That can actually change the criminal landscape. And we have had situations in Jamaica where in 1 year we're getting over 1,500 deportees, many of them convicted for serious crimes abroad, including aggravated sexual assaults, gun runnings, murders, etc. Sentences cut short and they are deported back to Jamaica. And they come back into an environment where jobs are not available. They feel insecure because whilst they were abroad and they were fueling the gangs, sending back guns and maintaining their street crews, they come back into Jamaica. They feel like they need security. So they are going to quickly form a group which they think is loyal to them. They want guns around them. They want to establish some dominance in the space. So they feature a lot in crime. However, I must say this, that in the last 10 years or so, with the kind of smart border technologies now implemented in the USA, an improvement in, border protection, preventing people from just slipping back into the country with the ease that they're used to. We're seeing less and less impact of deportations on our crime. In fact, those who are coming back now are older people who really don't want to have much to do with street-level criminal activities. But during the 1980s, 90s, they were a big challenge for us.
I think you bring up a really good point about the destabling effect of deportees coming back into smaller nations and the rippling effect. To give you an idea of it, when we were doing work for the U.S. Department of Homeland Security and looking at the relationship between MS-13 in L.A. and D.C. and El Salvador itself, we found that when looking at intelligence and crime data, we found that there were two factors that were the two primary drivers of homicide in El Salvador. Number one was the presence of MS-13. How many you have, whether it be on the street or in prison. But number two was the number of deportees from the U.S. coming back to El Salvador, and there was an exponential effect of every U.S. deportee that came back to a neighborhood, the level of homicide increased dramatically. And when we interviewed MS-13 members on the street, they argued the exact same thing that you did, that these small communities in El Salvador cannot absorb that kind of change that can exist due to the influence of a different culture being brought in and these changed expectations that deportees bring with them and attempt to alter the local landscape. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Good evening. I have a few questions. First one. Is there a direct correlation to the songs quoted and the rise in the homicide rate? And, secondly, now that we've explored the impacts, what will be further implemented to curtail criminal and gang activities? Why are we still engaged in a top-down approach? How do we explore the activities of a particular member of society without engaging said member of society? When will legislation be revisited to address the present stage of gang activity in the Federation? And how is it that gang members, the older ones, are so successful in recruiting younger children and to go from child to criminal?
Let me start with the question surrounding legislation. What I can say is that the police have engaged the federal government in terms of passing or revisiting the existing gang law. And so, as we speak now, we're in discussion with the Attorney General to see how best we can revise the existing law as it relates to criminal gangs. So that is a work in progress. You asked about the correlation between the lyrics and what is happening I'll speak a little bit and maybe the former commissioner could give his Jamaican perspective. But to say a direct correlation, I would say yes, because from our policing operations, these criminal gangs, when we enter their homes, this is all we are hearing. When you check social media, this is all the type of music they are listening to. And they are, when you look at some of the homicides that are committed, you could basically link some of the homicides to some of the lyrical content in some of these music.
Yes, it's just one of several questions that I'll comment on, and it's the one having to do with whether there is any correlation between what we call violent lyrics and the rates of homicide. You can't just say yes and leave it like that. You have to understand the nature and characteristics of gangs. That gangs do have conflicts. They have intra-gang conflict, that is within the gang. They have inter-gang conflict, gang on gang. Now, if you have conflicts and you can come to the police and report those conflicts, you can't go to court, you can't go to arbitration, you can't go to the Fair Trading Commission to report your conflict with the other gang. But even as you can't engage the formal systems of conflict resolution, what you find is that there are lyrics in music that are actually promoting an alternative. Kill the boy, crack him skull, murder them, right? Boy have him phone on speed dial, crack him skull before him can redial. Now, I had a slide on my presentation, which I didn't get to. In that slide, there are the faces of about 6 or so individuals who have been arrested, charged for murder, and sentenced to prison by the police in Jamaica. I think all but one of them is a dancehall DJ. These are people who murder people and release song about it. Vybz Kartel, when he murdered Lizard, he released a song about it. Have you ever killed a lizard yet? He murdered another man, and they killed the witness, and he put out a song on the 12th of June 2010. Witness elimination is my strategy, something like that. If the witness disappears, the evidence can't be given. You get off of the charge. The song is called Let Me Go. All right? Ninja Man murdered several people. He finally got convicted on one charge last year, and he's doing life in prison. There are several dancehall DJs who are facing the courts in Jamaica for murder. So whilst I can't say to you, lyrics uttered result in death, I can say to you, if you have conflicts and there is no other way of resolving those conflicts except for a conflict resolution doctrine which advocates violence against others, do the maths.
I do have to say, though, I think that that could be a red herring, right? It could be a distraction from addressing other issues that are perhaps may have more impact on homicide, right? I mean, we have had homicide, right? Homicide was popping up a long time before we had lyrics.
Let me give you
right?
one example.
There's just no evidence out there that suggests that lyrics is related to homicide.
In Jamaica, there is evidence. We have had people charged for 1 dozen murder. There's a man now, Tesha Miller. We had him on 12 murder charges at one time. Every time we arrested him, put him before the court, he got bail. He ran away, skipped bail, entered the United States on 3 occasions, caught, sent back. We put him before the court. They gave him back bail. All this time, the man had the opportunity to find the witnesses and murder them. The last 2 witnesses he killed, they trailed them out to St. Elizabeth and murdered them. Immediately after, his lawyers say, my client is ready for trial. All the cases had to be dismissed. Vybz Kartel thought the witness in his case that he's convicted for was dead. They paid his aunt $4 million to get her nephew killed. The police had to put out a statement, release some fictitious story saying that the guy has been killed, and they felt he was killed when we had him in secure custody.
Right.
When he was presented in court, they almost fainted. So there is a connection between at least the failure of the criminal justice system to hold them accountable.
Absolutely.
And the promotion of witness elimination.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Many, many Jamaicans who witnessed crime, murdered the night before court, murdered leaving court, their houses burned to the ground. It's happening, and the gangs are the ones who do it because the gang member is before the court, the message comes to his friend, this case is too strong, deal with the witness, and they do it. So if there is anybody who is comfortable ignoring the possible correlation, you can continue to do it. But I'm talking about a society that has had the experience of too many murders. A society which is now numb, where people are afraid to confront violence, afraid to speak out against violence. I know of cases where mothers with sons murdered. The mother witnessed it. The mother went into the witness box and told the judge that I have to live, I'm not giving any evidence, and took a sentence for it. Took a prison sentence for changing her story, lying to the court, saying that she didn't say anything. Because she said, me have to live and my two little daughters, them have to live. I can't give evidence against these boys. So you're still not convinced that there is a reasonable, remote possibility between the violence doctrine and the possible perpetration of murders? I'm not trying to convince you. I'm just trying to provoke some reflection. Oh, you were asking about St. Kitts?
Well,
okay. I'm sorry. Very sorry. Sorry.
We have had similar cases that the former commissioner spoken about. In fact, that is why we have developed our witness protection program, because we have seen where witness elimination have taken place in St. Kitts, and that is why we spoke about the code of silence, the culture of silence existing in our communities. And so it is a real life experience for persons who witness crime. They're afraid to come forward. And that is why, and I just want to educate the public that, and some of these persons who believe that when they eliminate a witness, the case will not move forward. We have changed our laws to suggest or to indicate to the court that even if they attempt to eliminate a witness, or a witness for some reason have been killed, unfortunately, their evidence can still be administered in court. And we have had convictions where criminals believe because they have eliminated the witness, the evidence will not be tendered in court. But we have had convictions in court where witness statements have been entered as evidence, and persons have been properly convicted.
I think there's a lady in the back who has a question.
Good evening. I came in late, but my question is, we are talking top down. The young lady asks bottom up. And I'm asking that because I live in an area where I have watched little boys move from babies to 10-year-olds, and now their behavior is indicating that they're moving into gangs. And I'm saying there must have been red flags somewhere. We seem to be missing the red flags. One of those youngsters, his mother called the police for him twice to take him to school. Now, I heard his mother stop a police car passing the other day and ask her, don't you all pick up youngsters off the street in the evenings anymore? And to me, the child is out of control. There's no question about that. He's just 14. I know he's smoking because he now there's always a gang of them all over the place. The mother can't control him. His brothers can't control him. And I'm saying, if you call police 2 and 3 times for a child, and a mother is now asking, don't the police do this, that, and the other? And I had an incident years ago where I went to make a complaint on a young man, and the police said, oh, so-and-so, we know so-and-so. So I am saying there must be red flags that we, in our small society, and the police in particular, is ignoring. So when you reach a stage where these youngsters, because I am seeing a gang formation again in Market Street. We used to have one, it died. It's growing again. And when you ignore these red flags, it is no surprise that the youngsters begin to move to the marijuana, and the gangs, you see them walking up and down the street every Friday evening, and I know the boys, and the boys know me. And shortly, very shortly, the gangs are going to recruit them. These are youngsters that put on their clothes every morning, and because I'm now home, I can see them. They put on their school uniform, and by 9:30, they're in the area. They're not even home. They're in the area in their uniform. My thing is, they're supposed to be truancy officers at school. They're supposed to be police officers at school. They're supposed to be guidance counselor. Isn't somebody there who can track? And then suddenly the boys are in gangs and the police is after the gangs. We are missing early red flags. We are going top down instead of bottom up, as far as I'm concerned.
I just want to say that when it comes to the top-down, bottom-up approach, fighting criminal gangs is not solely left to the police. And when you have a child at 8, 10, 11, and they are displaying those kind of behavior, the police should not be your first line of defense. There are other problems. Are there other indicating factors that some other expert, other than the police, could intervene and help that child? But a lot of times we see where parents turn to the police for a child who is 8 years, 10 years, and they're saying, well, I cannot go with my child. And I'm saying to you that the police at that stage is not the solution.
An assistant commissioner is describing, they didn't suddenly get up one day and decided to be a gangster, be in a gang, to be putting out contract killings. These are persons who we neglected. We neglected them in one way or the other. They stopped going to school. Their parents made several interventions. They never entered probation services. They did not enter state care. There was nothing we did, or there may be some things that we did that were not sufficient to give them the resilience that they needed, to give them positive alternatives to crime and violence. And the discussion that we are not highlighting enough that the young lady raised is vital. It's not a top-down approach. Very successful strategies, as my colleague from Jamaica will speak of, have involved communities in responsibility for peaceful communities, in school children in responsible for their personal safety in school, and inheriting a culture of lawfulness. So All of that to say that for the school system, the work of the community development division, the work of the youth departments, the work of our church services in this country that have a lot of interesting programs, all these are the type of supports that are needed to address the issues that the sister just raised, because they are important. They are important, and it is not going to be solved when they reach in Her Majesty's prison or when we are conducting an autopsy. The issue is, how do we ensure that all the services that are needed are there, and so that people don't fall through the cracks. She's pointing to a mother who said, isn't the Ministry of Education doing something? You all know the Ministry of Education has guidance counselors, they have truancy reports. These are the avenues that have to be beefed up. And maybe it is part of the work that we still need to do in St. Kitts and Nevis, and perhaps through our interagency protocol or another, to get what we want to call the soft services involved in building these resilience, in giving these positive alternatives to crime, in helping young people to find a job when they need it, etc., etc.
Thank you very much. I'm a member of Parliament, and I've heard the reference to top-down and bottom-up and all of those good things. We need to, I'm going to say, lay the blame where the blame is to be placed. Parents, and we keep talking about single parents not able to manage children. I came out of a single parent home. We will argue that that was 60 years ago or more, and things were different then. But principles of behavior and principles of parenting ought not to have changed. The link between individual homes and individual persons in respect of taking responsibility for raising their children. It's easy to have children. It is not so easy to raise them, and the more you have, the more difficult it becomes to raise the children and give them and teach them the principles, the correct social interactive skills. And I think we need to talk about those things and not begin to say the police is not doing this or a parent must call a police officer. Now let us look and examine truancy. Truancy begins when a child decides he is not going to school, or she don't want to go to school. The question is, why? Where do we place the school? Where do we place the management of the school, who are paid by the people of the country to provide a directive and direction giving and guidance and counseling? The introduction of counselors has sort of served to reduce the power which each teacher has in his or her classroom. And it is now being focused on one person. So we go now to the top down, because one person is dealing with 20 or 40 instances where the child comes out of a school setting or a class setting where the teacher ought to be able to recognize or to at least notice that Tom or Jerry or whomever has not been to school for 2 days. And therefore I have to do something if I have an interest in that child and in our society. Now, I also come not out of just being a politician. I've been a community worker. I've been a teacher and had to deal with that issue. When we saw some of our young men, and perhaps the acting commissioner might know of that, and I had to call the parents and have a conference with them on the behavior of their children. And if we're not willing to take that responsibility because of fear of reprisal, then relegating or leaving it to the police or to social services is going to be a doubly difficult problem. We have to take each unit and deal with that unit. And the more units we deal with, and the more systematically and sequentially we deal with those units and try to correct unit behavior, would be the better way of correcting the total community behavior. And that is where the bottom-up arrangement has to begin. We can't remove the responsibility from parents. And we can say to parents, if you need help, reach out for help, right? Now, a lot of parents, or some parents, let me say a lot, I can't say that, don't want to do that because they would be admitting failure. And people don't like to admit failure. But I feel we have the school system, and I think the madam with the name, with the pronunciation of Gwyneth or whatever, or Didi, made reference to it. We have to get the interaction of all those social partners and units to help with this problem. Otherwise, the top-down will always be the way which the government will try to deal with it, through the police or through social services. But we have to go down to the units and try to get the units to understand we have a responsibility before it gets to the point of being afraid because my son or my daughter has been inducted into a criminal gang, and therefore if something happens, I can't say anything. We have to prevent it from happening, and that can only be if we take corrective measures early, from 5, from 2, from 3, whatever age we see and feel that our children are beginning to show dissent, we must take action. And I'll say this for the last. I've had this thing where parents and people in community feel when a child is acting up, that that child is being cute, and therefore they laud that child. Or he's brave because he's acting up and behaving in an unruly manner. And we don't want to take action. We don't want to embarrass the child. We don't want to correct the child because we're afraid that people will say all kinds of things. But I want to say this, not taking action early, it has led to where we are today. Whether it is because we neglected the gang members, the gang leaders, or we're now neglecting the fact that the young ones are being recruited. And that, I think, is where we look at the bottom-up and the total involvement of the community, and everybody in the community should begin to see their responsibility in this matter.
Thank you. I think we have time for one more question.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. I have a question. I want to talk a bit. I have 12 explorers here tonight. Could you stand for me, please? Shadwell? Shadwell, I want to say to the panel that those are being directed by police, because I don't quite agree with what Ms. Eversley said. There are different kinds of police in today's world. I want the community police who are here to stand. These are some of the community policing team that we have operating. And these are the persons who are leading 400 plus children at this time, and who the schools are calling to help. And so I do not agree by your blanket statement that it's not the police. Suppose there are different kinds of police with different functions in today's world. Sit please, children. And what we're trying to do in St. Kitts is to, we have other programs called Teen and Police Service, where we have police in schools, not to beat up anybody, but to help these children come closer to police functions and get closer to for police to get closer to teams. Our next step, close to what the senior minister said, is we are going to organize community teams, because it's not just the police function. We need to bring together the different players in the community to work with the police or work with whoever to deal with the problems in that community. And so I want to just say to this group that I believe, and our Explorers program believe, that police have different functions and different police can do different things. Schools are calling police. These police, not to arrest anybody. Parents are calling them not to arrest anybody, but to help and to perhaps even mobilize social services to do certain things, or for that matter, the church. So I just want to say that different functions for police are emerging, and that is the model that we are working with here in St. Kitts. Thank you.
Thank you. I know that we still have a lot of questions out there. I want to appreciate everybody thank everybody who's spoken tonight and asked questions. We're going to go ahead and wrap things up with the Director of Training, Brian Roberts, who's the Director of Training for the RSS, is going to conclude things for us. Thank you.
A very good evening to all. On behalf of the Executive Director of the Regional Security System, I extend a warm welcome to everyone, a warm thanks to everyone for a stimulating discussion this evening as we discuss the more salient issues surrounding the gang culture in the contemporary Caribbean. First, let me express our profound thanks to our main partner, the European Union. As you know, this panel discussion was funded through the 10th European Development Fund project, which is a collaborative funding initiative between the RSS and the European Union. We appreciate the assistance in supporting our quest to raise awareness on key security issues and trigger much needed discussion among our stakeholders. This event is one in a series of panel discussions scheduled to be conducted in the RSS member states to build awareness on other security issues which impact on citizen security. The RSS 10th EDF project was awarded by the European Union through CARIFORUM to finance the implementation of the action entitled Strengthening of Law Enforcement and Border Security in the RSS member states. And this project, or this program of activities, seeks in part to promote public support for law enforcement initiatives and understanding of other social and criminal aspects which contribute to the criminogenic environment and remain part of the contemporary regional crime environment. I'm sure you would agree that this has been a useful exercise in providing awareness and stimulating discussion among the audience, both here and online, on the current nature of the gang phenomenon, the challenges at the national, regional, and hemispheric and global levels, encountering the threat, and viable approaches to tackling them at the national and regional levels. To our esteemed panel, let me first say thanks to Ms. Eversley, Country Manager for USAID, Community, Family, and Youth Resilience Program here in St. Kitts and Nevis. Thank you for highlighting model intervention programming for youth within USAID's mandate. As we move to embrace empirically based programmatic responses to the challenges of troublesome youth, your contribution was regarded as timely and instructive. We are also extremely delighted to have two of my former lecturers from the National Security and Strategic Management MSc program at the University of the West Indies, in Professor Clayton and Mr. Owen Elton. To Mr. Elton, Retired Commissioner of Police, Jamaica Constabulary Force, thank you for your succinct presentation on the gang culture in Jamaica and operational responses to address this phenomena by our security forces. We are profoundly grateful that you were able to share Jamaica's experiences that will help us to better respond to this problem. To Professor Anthony Clayton, your captivating presentation on policy responses to the gang culture was well received. In the Caribbean, we are all too aware that sometimes we grapple with formulating policies commensurate with our environmental reality. Thank you for highlighting key areas for consideration as the RSS member states seek to address an upsurge in crime and violence as spin-offs of the gang culture. To Dr. Charles Katz, thank you, sir, for skillfully steering us through this third panel discussion in the series and ensuring that we kept within the timelines. Your remarks and engagement with the panel and the audience helped to share some light on the pertinent issues ripe for discussion. We truly appreciate your wise counsel as we work through the thematic areas for discussion and look forward to a profounder relationship between the RSS and the Arizona State University. Thank you, sir. As a gentle reminder to our audience, Dr. Katz was the lead author for the 2015 RSS Troublesome Youth Group study, and this was the first evidence in the empirical collection of data for the RSS on gangs. Mr. MacArthur Brown, Assistant Commissioner of Police, Royal St. Christopher and Nevis Police Force. Thank you for providing the local perspective on the nature and impact of gangs on the local landscape. We are also profoundly grateful for the tremendous support you and your team provided to the RSS headquarters in coordinating this event. Thank you, sir. To you, the audience, both here and online, we thank you for supporting this discussion. Your engagement of the panelists implies that it was a worthwhile exercise, and we look forward to continued engagements with you. The media, as always, you're a crucial partner in raising awareness among agencies, publics, and we are grateful that you supported the event today. A special thank you to the team at Open Interactive for making the broadcast of this panel discussion possible. I also take this opportunity to inform the audience that the event will be rebroadcast by CMC as well as on the RSS Facebook page. Last, but by no means least, we want to thank the Ministry of National Security here in St. Kitts, especially the efforts of Ms. Marva Pinney, as she worked tirelessly to help us to coordinate this event and to make it a success. Thank you, the Ministry of National Security and Marva Pinney. Once again, thanks to everyone, and do have a pleasant night. God bless. Take care.